So, as everyone is aware, this is the City of Kinston Brownfields project. I did not put Sarah's name on here, so I apologize for that, Sarah. But we have Adam Short with the city that is working as our project manager on behalf of the city. And then Darren and myself are representing Mid-Atlantic and have been working with the city to administer this grant and coordinate with the EPA and make sure that everything goes according to the guidelines of the EPA for these types of grants. And so today what we want to do is just go through an introduction of what this grant is for and how we intend to use it, the purpose of the committee, the initial inventory that we pulled together, and what the access agreements that we would submit to the property owners and just kind of get that ball rolling. The community involvement plan that we've already submitted to the EPA, and then any questions that you may have at the end of this PowerPoint. So first and foremost, a brownfield is defined as a property that is abandoned, idled, or underused, where redevelopment is hindered by real or perceived environmental contamination. I'm sure everyone knows of a property that has a unspoken history. They're afraid to even touch it with a 10-foot pole. The idea is to use the funds from the EPA to do some preliminary background research on these properties, determine if the perceived environmental contamination is real and how that may or may not hinder the potential redevelopment and putting it back into use in the community. Oops. So types of properties that we tend to focus on are industrial, manufacturing, textile mills, filling stations, dry cleaners, machine shops, anything that would have an industrial use, chemical storage or use, things like that come to mind. Any sloppy practices that could potentially have impacts to the property or the surrounding properties. So for this project, an application was submitted to the EPA and they awarded $300,000 to the city to be spent over a 3-year period. And those funds, we outlined how much we anticipated we would spend on community outreach, inventory of potential properties, prioritizing those properties, doing initial phase 1 and phase 2 assessments, and then determining which of the properties that have been assessed might be good candidates for cleanup and redevelopment planning. And the application that was submitted to the EPA stated that we were going to be focusing this grant on the Queen Street corridor, from your southerly and northerly entrances into the downtown area, as far as what I understand. Now, the grant that was awarded to the city is for assessment purposes only. So your environmental due diligence, that includes actually the collection of soil and or groundwater soil vapor data to determine if historical activities at the site have actually resulted in contamination of the property. We can also use these funds to do asbestos and lead-based paint assessment to determine or quantify if those materials are within any of these old buildings downtown. And there are other types of grants as well. There's a cleanup grant, which typically will be applied for at the end of an assessment grant cycle when you determine which property, if any, would benefit from a potential cleanup. There's also area-wide planning grants, and if I understand correctly, I think this is the cooperative, different communities in an area, they can all apply together as a cooperative agreement. Revolving loan fund grants, I'm not entirely well versed in that. So Darren, if you want to interject at all to discuss that, feel free.
Well, revolving loan fund grant is where a community essentially, if there's enough interest they can apply for, I think it's up to $1 million, and they can loan that out to people that want to clean up and or redevelop projects. And depending on how those funds are used, EPA can turn those into either low interest rate loans, and there have been instances where they've been totally forgiven loans. But again, that's that's something that if there's enough interest in the community, those can be applied for and set up through the municipality.
And then at the end here, we have job training grants that can also be applied for. So another thing that we can use the EPA Brownfield grant funds for is to run some of these projects through the North Carolina Brownfields program. So these are different, but they can often work in tandem, which we have seen in several other grants that we've helped administer in the past. This program is to incentivize developers to redevelop properties in North Carolina that are quote unquote classified as brownfields, as opposed to developing some green space that has not been touched. And what it provides to the developer is both a covenant not to sue, and it also has a 5-year tiered tax exclusion. And the idea is we would use, if the property is deemed eligible, because you would need to apply to the program, once it becomes an eligible project for the North Carolina Brownfields program, we could use the EPA grant fund to do any additional assessment that the North Carolina Brownfields program deems necessary to determine that the redevelopment of that property is done so in a manner that will be safe for the future occupants of the property. So it is not necessarily a program that requires anybody to do cleanup per se, but just to ensure that at the end of the development, the people that are occupying that space are not being exposed to contaminants that could impact their health negatively. And this is a breakdown of what that 5-year exclusion would be for tax as the tax incentive for the prospective developer. This can not only benefit that developer at the end of the cycle of their development and as they own the property, but it can also make it very marketable. So if they've taken the property, they've done the development, they can sell it within this 5 years, and the new owner of the property will also benefit from that tax incentive. So it not only incentivizes people to, again, reinvest in properties that are underutilized, but it also makes it more marketable for future investors. So the idea of the steering committee is to get input from the community on which properties are great targets, as well as getting the word out to those in the community that because we work here in Raleigh, we're not as intimately involved with the community and know the best people to reach out to have a successful grant application. So we're hoping that with the steering committee, we can, you guys will help us make sure that we're reaching all of the intended targets and using these funds in the most effective way possible.
One thing I want to follow up on what Raina just said is what we try to encourage communities to think about this as is this grant is really an economic development opportunity, particularly for small rural communities like Kinston. Sometimes one of the biggest hurdles is getting somebody interested in stepping in and redeveloping or investing in a property that they may or may not end up purchasing or may end up passing on. So if we can use these funds on any site to conduct the initial phase 1 environmental assessment or to do the testing that somebody would eventually have to do to determine whether they wanted to purchase a property, if we can go ahead and clear those hurdles, get that out of the way, then if we can just put properties in a better position to be reinvested in, then that's a win. So I encourage people to look at this as, yes, it's an environmental grant, but if we can be strategic in how we use it, put the funds to good use, and in a small rural community, if we can get 2, 3, 4 sites better positioned, put back into productive reuse, then that's a win. So
for our initial inventory, we've done a little bit of research on the Queen Street corridor. Initially, the application indicated that the former JIL Recycling Center was of interest to the city. It's at the northern entrance into the downtown area. We've completed the phase 1 environmental assessment at that property, and are interested in potentially moving forward with phase 2 to really quantify what environmental impacts may be present at that facility at this time. It is my understanding that the city is potentially interested in foreclosing on that property and turning it into some sort of green space or mixed use for the community. So doing this additional assessment will really set us up nicely to be able to move forward with that process, potentially running it through the North Carolina Brownfields program, like I mentioned earlier. The tax exclusions might not be what would drive that for this property if it's owned by the city, but the liability protection that would come with that would be very attractive. And then from my understanding, there were some abandoned gasoline stations on the southern end of South Queen Street. I think one is still a gas station. A few of them are former gasoline stations. So I was told that we really want to start focusing on the south part of Queen Street. So our next steps will be trying to reach out to those property owners and see if they're interested in participating in the program. And then yesterday, I received an email from a woman. Her name is Leah. I can't remember her last name right now at this second, but she works for a property management company out of Rocky Mount. And she is interested in 3 properties on North Queen Street that's currently owned by a development firm out of Durham, North Carolina. So that's 317, 321, and 323 North Queen Streets. It's right below where the railroad intersects over Queen Street. And I had a conversation with her this morning. She said all 3 of those are completely vacant, and she's interested in purchasing and redeveloping the properties, some sort of residential, retail, office, mixed use, which would be a wonderful addition to your Queen Street area, in buildings that are just sitting there, not contributing to your tax base or your community at the moment. This right here is our draft access agreement. It's 2 pages. And this is what we submit to any property owner that expresses interest in potentially participating in the program. This just gives us site access so that we can walk their property and conduct whatever is necessary to do our initial site visit, or potentially subsequent phase 2 assessment if they decide to move forward with additional assessment at their properties. Another thing that we have done to date is a community involvement plan. We worked together with Adam and put together a plan on how to really get participation from the community to make sure that this project is successful. And we have also put together a website, Kinston Brownfields website. And it's still in draft form, but it's getting pretty close, I think, to being ready to be published for anybody to access. And what's interesting about this website is that this is the 3rd grant that has been awarded to Kinston. So not only are we going to focus on the properties that we are going to be assessing through these next 3 years, but it also gives a lot of history of what's already been accomplished in Kinston with the previous assessment grant and the Harvey Oil Cleanup Grant that was awarded to the city, I believe, in 2018. So I'm not sure if you can click this. Okay, so this is just, you know, the 3 grants added together. These are the amount of parcels that we've assessed. And then you can click in various places to get to information of the grants so far. So this was our first $400,000 assessment grant, the $195,000 cleanup grant, and then the grant that we're currently working under right now. You can go to learn more, and it shows all the properties that we've worked on in the past, and it'll talk about accomplishments from our phase 1 and phase 2 efforts at each property. So I think that this would be a really great tool. Adam has indicated that we could potentially link it up to the city's website. So if anyone ever has any interest or questions, you know, you can always direct them to this website to give them a little bit more information about what we've done to date, how these funds can be used, access to the EPA website and our website if they want any more information on the partners. And then some, you know, frequently asked questions, things of that nature, and then contact. So if they want to know if they have a property in the area, whether it's a good fit for this project, this grant project, or, you know, if the city is interested in moving forward, they can reach out to Adam or myself, or they can just, you know, send this little submit, and it should just come straight to my email, and then I can, you know, reach out to them and get them whatever information that they need. So back to this, we have some fact sheets that we have put together in the past. We've given those out at you know, meetings or community meetings. I know that's a little challenging right now, but hopefully in the near future, maybe sometime the next year, we can start meeting in person again, maybe having some sort of community outreach and give this information out to the community members. Not sure if you guys have monthly council, but maybe we can have updates, or you can provide updates to your council members as you see fit. And, you know, they can also, maybe they're not part of the steering committee, but they can essentially serve a similar role. They might have people they know that might benefit, or just have ideas that they can pitch to us on how to, you know, better reach out to the community, just anything that can help this project be as successful as possible. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. If you guys have any questions on anything I didn't touch, or if you want me to elaborate on anything, let me know.